Welcome to See Crime Stories, true stories of the missing and the pursuit of answers. On a cold December morning in South Carolina, deputies roll up on a quiet river landing that should have been empty. Peachtree Landing is the kind of place locals use to launch a boat, walk a dog, maybe park for a few minutes and leave. It is not where you expect to find a car sitting alone for hours, untouched, with no sign of the person who drove it there. The vehicle is a green Dodge Intrepid. Plates check out to a 20-year-old woman named Heather Elvis. The doors are locked. No broken glass. No obvious damage. No keys in the ignition. No purse in sight. There is no blood on the seats, no struggle visible from the outside. To the first responding officers, it looks less like a crime scene and more like a question mark. They run her information. 20 years old. Lives and works in Myrtle Beach. Did not show up for her shift. Has not returned home. Not answering her phone. Within those first minutes, the context changes. This is not just an abandoned car. This is a missing person, and this car is the only physical object tying Heather to this stretch of river. Investigators start with what is in front of them. They document the position of the vehicle. They note tire tracks, footprints, patterns in the dirt and gravel, the orientation of the car in relation to the water. They photograph everything. Nothing jumps out as a clear sign of violence. That absence doesn't reassure anyone. In real cases, a clean scene can be as concerning as a bloody one. An empty landing at the end of a dark road means there were no casual witnesses, no cameras from nearby businesses, no passing traffic that can fill in the blanks for them. Heather's family is already trying to reach her. Friends have not heard from her since the early hours. Her phone has gone quiet. There is no transaction activity, no routine check-in, no sign she chose to disappear. The more they check, the more that locked Dodge becomes the center of a tightening circle, the last confirmed trace of a young woman whose life, on paper, should still be moving forward. From this point on, the case will be built the way so many modern investigations are, around a fixed point and what radiates out from it. One car. One location. A narrow window of time. Phone records. Surveillance logs. Relationships. Patterns of behavior. Every answer has to connect back to why Heather's vehicle is here while she is not. If someone leaves behind their car, their job, their family, their phone records go dark, but there is no body and no obvious scene, at what point does a missing person become, in the eyes of investigators, the likely victim of a crime? Before any investigator can decide what might have happened to a missing person, they have to understand who is actually missing. Not the photograph on the flyer, not the headline version, but the real person and the pattern of their days. With Heather Elvis, that pattern is clear, documented, and consistent right up until the night she disappears. At 20 years old, Heather is living what a lot of young adults along the South Carolina coast live: long shifts, late nights, small apartments, big plans. She works at a restaurant in Myrtle Beach, the kind of place that feeds tourists and locals in equal measure. Her schedule is irregular but logged, her paychecks are steady, and her managers know when she's supposed to be there. She shares details of her life in normal ways, calls to her parents, messages with friends, photos on social media. Nothing in those records suggests a person planning to sever ties and vanish. Investigators pull her phone records, bank activity, work history, and recent communications. What they see is a young woman building independence. She has moved out of her parents' home. She is figuring out transportation, rent, friendships, dating. There are emotional ups and downs, like anyone in their early 20s, but the concrete data points matter more than impressions. Her account activity is active. Her phone use is high. She is connected to family, to coworkers, to her circle. People rely on her showing up. In families like hers, silence is data. Heather's parents and siblings report that she is not the type to disappear without a word. That is not treated as a sentimental statement, it is weighed against the records. They are used to hearing from her. She calls when there is car trouble. She checks in after late shifts. When she moves out, she does not cut them off, she keeps them in the loop. When that contact stops, completely and abruptly, it is more than hurtful. It is a measurable deviation that will later help support the conclusion that something was done to her, not chosen by her. Detectives map out her days and nights leading into mid-December 2013. There are documented stresses. She has been involved in a relationship that is complicated and unhealthy, and she has been trying to move past it. Friends describe her as emotional at times, but also hopeful, open to new connections, taking small steps to reset her life. What matters for the case is this: she is making plans. She has reasons to show up at work. She has reasons to answer her phone. She has not emptied accounts, sold belongings, or left notes. Statistically and practically, it is far more consistent with a person continuing life than staging an exit. When audiences hear 20-year-old waitress vanishes, it is easy to plug in stereotypes: party girl, transient lifestyle, unstable decisions. The file does not back that up. She is social, yes. She is young. She is imperfect. But there is structure in her life. A responsible investigative team does not assume she put herself in danger and walk away. They treat her as what she is, a missing citizen whose habits, digitally and physically, stop on a specific night without credible explanation. This foundation is not just background. It becomes a working tool. Once her phone goes dark, once transactions stop, once no one credible reports seeing her after the early hours of December 18th, every hour of prior normal behavior strengthens the suspicion that the event at the center of this timeline is not voluntary. You cannot call a case cold or solved without first proving who the victim was in real terms, and why their disappearance is an anomaly that demands accountability. This is where engagement should start, not with speculation about who did what, but with a simple question: if this were your daughter, friend, or coworker, and all their everyday data just stopped, how long would you accept maybe she just left as an answer? By the third day of the investigation, the file on Heather Elvis is no longer just about a missing young woman and an abandoned car. It now includes a name and a pattern of contact that shifts the case from could she have walked away to who had a reason to pull her off course. When detectives review Heather's recent phone records and messages, they see an age gap and a status flag that stands out. Over the previous months, there has been steady communication between Heather and a man who is significantly older, married, and established in the same community. He is not a stranger from out of state. He is local, accessible, present. The kind of person who can cross paths with a 20-year-old server working late shifts in Myrtle Beach without raising suspicion. They confirm the relationship through more than rumors. Call logs show repeated contact. Messages suggest intimacy. Witness statements from coworkers and friends back up what the data already implies: this was an affair. For investigators, this is not about judging Heather. It is about identifying leverage points, people who know her routines, who know where she lives, who know how to get her attention at odd hours. The man's home life is not a side note, it is central. He has a wife. He has children. He has a life that does not match the relationship he has been carrying on with Heather. When that double life is exposed inside his household, the reaction matters, because it is documented. Investigators obtain messages from the wife directed at Heather. They see language that is hostile and direct. They see monitoring of the husband's phone. They see rules imposed on his movements after the affair is uncovered. None of that by itself is a crime. But it establishes a climate, tension, anger, humiliation, and a fixation on the younger woman at the center of it. From a case-building standpoint, this is where the story of Heather's disappearance gains structure. She is not simply missing in a vacuum. She is missing in the aftermath of a broken affair with someone whose wife has expressed clear resentment and who now has every reason to want the problem contained. The investigators map this triangle on paper: the young woman, the married man, the spouse. Then they overlay the electronic trail. Patterns emerge in who calls whom, and when, in which numbers go quiet after news coverage begins, and how quickly stories harden when officers start asking questions. This is not about turning Heather into a stereotype or making the audience blame her for being involved. Real cases are always more complicated than that. A key value in telling this story honestly is acknowledging that vulnerability does not erase someone's right to safety. People make mistakes in relationships. That does not give anyone permission to make them disappear. Keeping that distinction clear is part of respecting the victim instead of reducing her to a plot twist. For viewers following along, this is the moment to pay attention to how small decisions intersect with dangerous people. Law enforcement in Horry County is not guessing in the dark. They are working a documented chain, a confirmed affair, a documented confrontation, and a set of adults whose lives now collide with a 20-year-old who will soon be gone. When a missing person case includes someone with this level of access and emotional history, that person moves quickly up the list of people who must be fully accounted for. As the timeline tightens toward the night of December 17th and the early hours of December 18th, the presence of this married man in Heather's recent past is no longer just background. It is a live variable investigators cannot ignore. Because when someone disappears without a trace, the people who had the most to lose, or the most to hide, rarely sit at the edges of the story. By the time investigators trace Heather Elvis's recent calls, texts, and social media activity, the outline of a triangle is no longer speculation. It is documented. A 20-year-old server in Myrtle Beach. A married man with a family. And a wife who does not take discovery of the affair quietly or privately. For law enforcement, this is the first major shift in the case, from a missing person file to a conflict map with clear pressure points. The messages tell that story better than rumor ever could. After the affair comes to light, the married man is forced to cut contact. That is not just his word, it is visible in the abrupt change in tone and frequency in the records. He calls to end things. Heather's replies show confusion, hurt, attempts to understand. The contact that once looked mutual now reads one-sided. On the other side of that phone, investigators see a household trying to lock down a problem, tightly. The wife's involvement is not guessed, it is preserved. There are posts aimed at Heather, mocking and hostile. There are messages sent directly to her that make it clear she is seen as the cause of humiliation. The husband's phone activity shifts under supervision. Restrictions are placed on where he can go and who he can speak to. Some of that comes out later through testimony, some is inferred from device usage and location history. Alone, these details are ugly but legal. Together, they show an environment where anger is not cooling off. It is being documented in real time. Detectives underline certain entries in the logs. Late-night calls. Repeated check-ins. Passive-aggressive posts that track Heather's movements or reference her work. They are careful not to overstate it, but they also don't ignore the pattern: a young woman who has backed away from an affair, and a married couple who have not fully backed away from her. This is the kind of material that matters in a real investigation. It speaks to motive and mindset. It explains why one person in this story might want contact again and why another might want the entire situation erased. It also explains something crucial about access. The married man knows Heather's schedule, her workplace, her habits. The wife knows enough about Heather to target her online and to monitor her husband's behavior. That means both stand close to the one person who will soon vanish. The key here is discipline. A serious case agent will not say, "They were angry, so they must be guilty." Instead, they ask, who had the combination of emotional investment, opportunity, and familiarity to plan or exploit a vulnerable moment? In the Heather Elvis file, the digital trail points back to the same household more than once. Not as a conviction, but as a priority. Telling this story fairly also means saying something out loud that people sometimes dodge. Being involved with someone else's spouse is a bad decision, but it is not a death sentence. It does not void your right to protection under the law. When a case like this is told without that clarity, the victim gets blamed and the real danger, controlling behavior, escalating harassment, people who cannot tolerate embarrassment, gets minimized. A good true crime narrative doesn't do that. It names the risk factors without excusing whatever came next. As the timeline moves toward the night of December 17, 2013, investigators are watching how this triangle tightens. Contacts slow down, but tensions remain. There is no evidence Heather is stalking anyone. There is clear evidence she has been on the receiving end of hostility and control. In a missing person case where no body has been recovered, this kind of verified hostility becomes part of the framework that later allows a jury, and the public, to understand why this is not random. So, staying with one case, one location, one story, we have Heather Elvis in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, a documented affair, a documented backlash from a married couple, and a clear line of access to her life. No alternate victim. No second crime scene. No second ending. Just a pressure point that is about to intersect with the last hours anyone can place her on the map. On the evening of December 17, 2013, Heather Elvis makes a decision that, on its face, looks healthy. She agrees to go out with someone new. Not the older married man. A different man. Her age. No shared secrets, no double life attached. Just a straightforward first date in Horry County, South Carolina. He picks her up around 10 p.m. They drive through neighborhoods to look at Christmas lights. That detail is confirmed later, not romanticized, his statement, her messages, and the route history match. They stop in a mall parking lot, where he lets her practice driving his manual transmission car. Heather sends photos from that moment to people she trusts. She is smiling. She is present. She is, in that verifiable slice of time, pointed toward something ordinary. For investigators, this date becomes more than color. It is structure. They talk to the man, they verify his timeline, they compare his account with records. Phone data, vehicle movements, and witness statements are checked against what he tells them. It aligns. There is no unexplained gap, no hidden detour, no sign he is holding back contact with Heather after he drops her off. When you work a case like this, clearing people is as important as suspecting them. He is logged as the last confirmed person to see her alive and, crucially, the first major lead to be ruled out. He leaves her at her apartment complex around 1:15 a.m. on December 18th. That time is not guessed. It is backed by his call records after he leaves, by the lack of further activity linking him physically to her location, and by the absence of any credible evidence to contradict it. He goes home. His night is over. Heather's is not. Shortly after, Heather reaches out to her roommate, who is out of town. That call, around 1:44 a.m., is part of the official record. She talks about the date, about the feeling of moving on. There is energy in her voice. She is not talking about running away. She is not talking about disappearing. The call ends, and on the board in the detective squad room, that time becomes another fixed marker. Heather Elvis is alive, at home, communicating normally in the first half of the 2 a.m. hour. This sequence matters because it narrows the window. It cuts off lazy narratives. You cannot realistically frame this as a young woman spiraling out of control on that date. The evidence does not support that version. Instead, the date forces anyone looking at this case to confront a more uncomfortable question. If a verified, cooperative witness drops her home safe, and she is positive about the night, then something else, not him, not that evening, intercepts her life after that point. For her family, knowing she had a good night before she vanished is painful and grounding at the same time. It disproves the idea that she walked into the dark because she had nothing to hold on to. She was trying to reset. For an audience, it is a reminder that the most dangerous moments do not always come when everything looks broken. They can come right after someone decides to do better. In professional investigations, this is where focus tightens. With the date cleared, attention shifts back to the unresolved tension already mapped in the file, the older married man and his wife, their documented hostility, their access. The path ahead in the timeline does not branch into a new story or a new victim. It loops back to the same small group, the same geography, the same conflict that has been getting louder in the background. And somewhere between that upbeat debrief at 1:44 a.m. and the last activity on Heather's phone, another contact will step into frame. Not as a rumor, but as another point of data that either fits this timeline cleanly or exposes who forced it off course. After locking in Heather Elvis's last normal movements, investigators turn to the gap that matters. What happens between that upbeat call at 1:44 a.m. and the moment her phone goes silent? In that narrow window, the case stops being theoretical. It becomes a sequence of verifiable choices, and one of those choices does not belong to a stranger. Records show outbound contact to Heather's phone from a number that is not registered to a residence or a cell. It is a payphone. That alone is unusual in 2013. When detectives trace it, they learn it is located at a local gas station in the Myrtle Beach area, operating in the hours when most people are asleep. Surveillance footage places a familiar figure there at that time, the married man who had told his wife, and would later tell law enforcement, that he had cut ties with Heather. He uses the payphone to call her. That is not rumor, it is documented and later presented in court. He does not dispute making the call once confronted with the evidence. For investigators, this is a major shift. A man who claimed the affair was over is reaching out to the 20-year-old who is now missing, in the middle of the night, from a device that does not immediately tie back to him. That choice undercuts his earlier statements and raises an obvious question inside the task force. Why does an honest explanation need a payphone? Heather responds. Her phone activity changes after that contact. Messages and calls show renewed communication with the same man who was supposed to be out of her life. Her roommate's earlier account of that night, Heather being excited about moving on, now sits beside a new reality. The past is pulling at her again, not by accident, but by deliberate outreach. As detectives chart this activity on a board, the pattern is clear. The last verified safe interaction is with the new date. He is cleared. The next significant interaction is initiated by the older married man from a payphone. That is not a narrative flourish, it is a hard pivot in the data. He knew where to reach Heather. He did not use his own phone. He chose a method that, on its face, suggests he did not want the call easily traced. In serious cases, small choices like that are never ignored. Investigators confirmed through interviews and records that his household had been under strain because of the affair. They know his wife had confronted Heather in messages and online posts. Now they know he broke the supposed no-contact boundary in the hours immediately preceding Heather's disappearance. They do not need to label him guilty to recognize that this event moves him from background context to active focus. The call is followed by movement. Heather's phone, which had been stationary at her apartment complex, begins to register location changes consistent with her leaving home. The exact content of the conversations is not fully known, but the sequence is fixed: payphone call, renewed contact, phone in motion. When you lay this against the hostility already documented between the couple and Heather, the result is a narrow, charged window of time that cannot be dismissed as random. For the families and for anyone watching this case unfold, details like a payphone can feel small. In the file, they are not. They mark intent. They separate careless talk from calculated contact. When a missing person leaves their residence after that kind of call and is never seen again, investigators are justified in asking whether that moment was the setup to everything that followed. If you're following closely, this is the point where one question sits heavier than the rest. When a man with motive and access chooses a payphone to reconnect with a woman who will be gone within hours, what explanation would you accept for that decision? Once the payphone call is confirmed, the gap in Heather Elvis's final hours is no longer blank. It is a narrow, traceable window, and investigators go straight to the numbers. After 2 a.m. on December 18th, Heather's phone shows continued contact with the same man who called from the payphone. The tone of those calls is not recorded in audio for us, but their existence is enough. He had reinserted himself into her night. The next key point is movement. Heather's phone, which had been stationary at her apartment complex, begins to travel. That movement is backed by tower data and consistent with her driving her own Dodge Intrepid away from home. Detectives later pair that activity with what is known about her car's final location. The Dodge is found at Peachtree Landing. The route from her apartment to that boat landing is limited. It is not guesswork to say someone chose to go there. It is an isolated area off Highway 814 in Horry County, not a common shortcut or crowded destination at 3 in the morning. When you place a late-night call from a payphone, make contact with a former girlfriend, watch her leave home, and the only thing that surfaces is her car at a remote landing, that sequence demands an explanation rooted in more than chance. Cell tower records do more than show Heather's phone on the move. They also capture activity from devices linked to the married man and his household. Investigators notice overlaps, pings that show their phones and vehicles taking paths consistent with the same corridors leading toward the landing and back again in that critical time frame. Surveillance cameras along parts of the route pick up a dark truck matching the description of the vehicle registered to that family. The state will later argue that this is not coincidence, it is corroboration. On the ground at Peachtree Landing, what they do not find is as important as what they do. There is Heather's car, parked in a way that suggests it did not drift or crash. There is no body, no obvious blood pattern, no struggle laid out for the camera. That absence makes the case harder, not easier. But when you pair a clean physical scene with a tight digital trail, a picture starts to form. Someone with direct access to Heather persuaded or pressured her to come to a place where there were no witnesses, and whatever happened next was efficient enough to leave no clear forensic footprint behind. From a human perspective, this is the turning point that unsettles people who follow real cases. Up to this moment, there is always the lingering hope that a missing person walked off or got lost. With Heather, the hard data strips that away. A young woman who had just been on a safe, documented date, who had contacts and obligations, does not end up with her car abandoned at an isolated landing by accident, immediately after secret contact from a man who had reasons to hide that call. The investigative team does not have a body. They do have synchronized movements: Heather's phone and car, the married man's call, the paths tied to his home, the final ping near Peachtree Landing, then silence. When those elements are laid together, they mark this window, roughly between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., as the likely period in which Heather Elvis encountered the event that took her out of her own life. If you lay that timeline out yourself, private payphone call, controlled contact, remote meeting spot, no more signals from Heather, what part of it feels accidental? When Heather Elvis's Dodge Intrepid is pulled from Peachtree Landing, the response is immediate. Horry County deputies, sled, boats, dogs, helicopters, volunteers, they all worked at River Landing and the surrounding woods. They go back, again and again. They check the shoreline, drag the water, rewalk paths, verify tips. The result is consistent. No Heather, no body, no weapon, no clear physical scene that explains why her car is there and she is not. For a lot of families, that's the moment hope hangs on technicalities. For investigators, it's the moment the standard missing person checklist is exhausted. With no trace in the water, no sign she left the country, no financial or digital life after December 18, 2013, the file crosses an invisible line. This is now treated as a likely crime without a body. At that point, the focus tightens on the same two names that have been in the background since the affair surfaced, Sidney Moorer and his wife, Tammy. Detectives already know about the relationship, the hostile messages, the late-night payphone call, and the overlapping movements near Peachtree Landing. What pushes this further is not a new rumor, it is a lie. When first questioned, Sidney denies contacting Heather that night. Phone records, surveillance, and the payphone trace say otherwise. In 2017, he is convicted of obstruction of justice for misleading investigators about that call. That verdict does more than add a charge to his name. It confirms, in open court, that he tried to conceal communication with a woman who then vanished. For prosecutors, it is a clear signal: if you are innocent and unconcerned, you don't lie about being the last person to reach her. From there, the state builds what is known as a nobody case. Not by inventing drama, but by stacking documented facts. Heather Elvis disappears within hours of secret contact with Sidney Moorer. Her car is left at an isolated landing where Sidney's truck is seen on video in the same time frame. Cell data places devices linked to the Moorer household on routes that match trips toward and away from that area. The history of threats, monitoring, and hostility from Tammy toward Heather shows motive and intent to remove her from their lives. Heather's life stops cold: no calls, no posts, no bank use, no reliable sighting, ever again. Individually, each point needs explanation. Together, they outline a deliberate act. The state of South Carolina does not charge murder. Without a body, they cannot prove how or where Heather died. But they can argue that she was unlawfully taken and never returned. In 2018, a jury finds Tammy Moorer guilty of kidnapping and conspiracy to kidnap Heather Elvis and sentences her to 30 years. In 2019, a separate jury convicts Sidney Moorer of kidnapping as well, also giving him 30 years. These outcomes belong to this case alone. They are not a twist imported from another story. They are the legal conclusion of the evidence surrounding Heather's last night. Two people held responsible for taking her, even though the state still cannot show a grave. After the verdicts, the appeals come. The Moorers challenge rulings, jury exposure, publicity. In 2023, the South Carolina Court of Appeals upholds the convictions. The state Supreme Court declines to overturn them. As of November 11, 2025, both remain convicted in connection with Heather Elvis's disappearance. Their filings continue. The law allows them to keep trying. But the standing record is clear. The justice system, looking at this timeline, concluded that Heather did not simply drive away and vanish on her own. What has never changed is the hardest fact for her family and for anyone who has followed this case honestly: Heather Elvis has not been found. No one has pointed investigators to her remains. No courtroom has been able to say exactly what happened to her after that window at Peachtree Landing. The case is solved only in the sense that two responsible parties have been identified and punished for the kidnapping. The central question, where is Heather, remains open. There is a quiet lesson in that, and it has nothing to do with blaming a 20-year-old for getting involved with the wrong person. Real cases like this underline three things: how quickly an unhealthy relationship can escalate when pride and control are threatened, how crucial digital evidence is when visible scenes are wiped clean, and how families and communities must keep a victim human in the story, not just a name attached to a verdict. Heather Elvis was a daughter, a co-worker, a friend, a young woman trying to find her way. That is who this case is about. If you have sat through this story and followed the evidence, one question is left to carry forward: not to invent a second ending, but to acknowledge what is missing. With two people in prison for taking her, when will someone finally say where Heather is? I'm closing this story with one simple truth: Heather Elvis deserved to come home. Cases like this remind me how quickly secrecy, control, and ignored warnings can erase a future. Value your safety, trust your instincts, check on the people you love. No concern is overreacting when something feels off. Tell me what this case raised for you, and where you're watching from. If this episode made you think or feel anything real, comment below and hit subscribe so we can keep asking hard questions together.